Thank you for joining the August session of Dragon Trail's monthly webinar series. Today we'll be sharing a detailed 2019 market update for the US and Canada, and then discuss a number of strategies and suggestions for tourism brands and businesses marketing to China in uncertain times, which can be applicable to destinations all around the world. If the past year has shown us anything, it's that whether you're in Sweden or Thailand or the US, you should be prepared for unplanned events that could affect tourism and figure out the best and most effective approach to minimizing the impact. For those of you who have not previously attended our webinars and may not have heard from me before, my name is Sienna and I'm Dragon Trail's Communications Manager based in our London office. We're very honored to have with us today as guest speaker, Richard Champley, who is Senior Research Analyst and Program Manager at the US National Travel and Tourism Office. Presenting together with me today as well from Lexington, Kentucky is Dragon Trail's President for the Americas, Matt Grayson.
Thanks, Sienna. Hello, everyone. Glad you can make it to our webinar today. Just want to tell you a little bit about Dragon Trail Interactive. Dragon Trail Interactive is a digital marketing and solutions agency solely focused on the outbound Chinese travel market. The company was founded in 2009, and we are celebrating our 10th anniversary this year in 2019. What makes Dragon Trail Interactive unique is our focus on China, on the travel industry, and on digital content and marketing. We have 5 offices, 3 of which are in China, in Beijing, Shanghai, and Xi'an, an office in the UK, and an office in the US. Next slide, yes. The next slide gives you a good cross-section of our client base. As you can see, we are active in all industry verticals and all continents except for Antarctica. Our clients are large, small, and all sizes in between.
Thanks, Matt. Just introducing our agenda today. We'll first get market updates on Chinese tourism to the US and Canada in 2019, and then we'll talk about best practice for Chinese tourism marketing in uncertain times. Then we'll take a look at 3 tourism brands around the world who have really put some of these strategies into action. And then we'll finish with a Q&A session. You can ask questions at any point during the webinar by using the Q&A button, which you should see on your Zoom control panel. If you can ask questions using the Q&A button, this is better than asking the questions in the chat, as with the Q&A button, we can easily see and log and make sure that we answer all of the questions at the end of the webinar, whereas using the chat function, the questions can get a little bit lost. We will also be emailing all attendees in the next day or 2 with a PDF of the webinar slides, as well as a link to where you can rewatch the presentation online, just in case there's any information that you'd like to review. So let's get started with some market updates, and I will hand over to Richard from the NTTO to introduce the US market updates.
Thank you, Sienna and Matt. This is Richard Champley, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Pleased to be with you. As Sienna mentioned, I'm with the National Travel and Tourism Office in Washington, D.C., part of Department of Commerce. What I'm going to present in the next 10 slides or so are data that we utilize, we call and process through our various systems, one of which is a survey of international air travelers, plus some arrival data that we obtained from Department of Homeland Security. So I'm going to proceed here with this slide right up front on the number of Chinese residents who have visited the United States in the last 10 years. And you see it's been pretty much an accelerating growth pattern here from 2009 through at least through 2017. 2017 was a record year. 3.17 million Chinese visited the US. Spending, which I don't have here, but mentioned, was totalized or estimated at 34.6 billion, that's with a B. billion. In 2018, actually, it was down a bit from 2017. This does include education. So the student part of Chinese visitation to the US is quite large. And that includes, we're looking at 3 different segments here. It'd be tourism, tours, visit friends and relatives, business and students, and then other purposes also. There was a decline in 2018, down 5%. That's been on our website, and that's been kind of broadcast around. There was a decline there. It's been kind of a bit tepid in this market, but it's large, and we see it as a growing segment long term. Also in 2019, in the first 6 months, it was down 3% from last year, which was down 5.6. So if anything, the decline seems to be lessening, but our long-term prospects are bullish. So next slide, please. Thank you. This is a look at the next 3 slides will be a look at the visa situation with China. And this data comes benefit actually of Department of State. And this first slide looks at over time, the interview wait times, which how long do people that are interested in visiting the US have to wait to get interviewed at one of the consulates, of which there are 5 right now. And it seemed like it, before 2015, it was off the charts, way up high. It came down, has been fairly stable until just this year. And you saw a spike there, especially in Shanghai and a couple other embassies or consulates, and then it's come back down a little bit more normal. And what's the reason for that? I guess there was some holiday periods in there, although there'd be holiday periods in years before too. But we understand from Department of State that there was some staffing gaps due to a 14-month hiring freeze here, and that might have had somewhat to do with the government shutdown earlier this year. So it seems like it's back to being normal. So there's new hiring going on, so that's taking place now. In the future here, there's going to be actually another post, 6th one in Wuhan on 2020, and then in Shenyang that will be expanded also. So there's some growth in the ability of the State Department to handle interviews. Okay, next slide, please. And this is looking at the number of visas issued, basically the B and the F, B being B1, B2, tourist, business, and F would be education. So you see growth in that. It really jumped in 2015, but what happened, there was a watershed event in late 2014, November, that actually the visa validity was extended from 1 year to 10. Before that, it was like for every year you would come, you'd have to get a new visa. And that changed to a 10-year period, effective almost immediately at the end of 2014, but for sure in 2015. So to some extent, that shows why there would be a decline, because there'd be less need for repeats every year, because one is good for 10 years. Some of those, there's been some speculation that people may have gotten that 10-year visa without really necessarily intending to travel in the near future. They just wanted to kind of bank it in case it got reversed and then they'd have the 10-year. I don't know, that's speculation. But so part of this, what appears to be a decline, is masked by the fact that it went from a 1 to a 10-year. Okay, next slide, please. And this looks at another element of the aspect of visa denials, percentage of applicants, and that looks to be on a rise. However, part of the factor of going from 1 to 10 years is that when the 10-year visa is conducted, processed, there's more scrutiny involved in it than the 1 year was. So there may have been some denials based on that, but it hasn't gone flat, it's been increasing. So I couldn't speak to that, but I think part of it is there's just more scrutiny on the application process because it's gone to 10 years. So Next slide, please. I always like to do this when I look at markets. I'm from the airline industry, way back, previous life. And so I think when we look at airline capacity, it speaks loudly as to what intention of carriers are regarding especially the near term future and the past as to what they're putting in the market, what skin in the game do they have, what metal are they putting out there, because it's a cost factor for them. And so it does speak a bit, especially for 2019. But looking at the three periods here, we're seeing the mix of U.S. carriers, which again on the bottom there in the darker color, and then the Chinese carriers. And looking back at, this is not what we call an open market situation. The U.S. has open skies with 105 some countries. With China, it's not an open market. It's not open skies per se. It's liberalized. It's been liberalized several times over the last couple of decades, which means that the number of flights, frequencies per week has been increased to go with the flow of increased demand. So, but it isn't a free and open market yet. Both sides would like to work at that more. It'll happen, but not at the moment. So, but there's parity in there in that for every flight that a U.S. carrier flies, a Chinese flag carrier could fly one too. Not on the same routes, but they can choose how they want to do it. And previous to 2017, we saw more of a U.S., not dominance, but majority of the market. It was like 60% of the capacity, in other words, number of seats or frequencies, was flown by U.S. carriers. And then that kind of went to a 50-50, and now it's a little bit less from the U.S. side and more from the Chinese carrier side. It's interesting because, well, you look at 2018, and 2018 capacity put out there compared to 2017 was up 5.5%. However, the growth in the U.S. market, U.S. carriers, was less than 1%. The Chinese carriers almost 9%. But coming into 2019, this might tie in again why we're seeing the arrivals being lower, is overall capacity went down 2.3%. But the U.S. component of that was down 8%, and the Chinese carriers only down 1%. So the mix comes out to be -2%. The Chinese carriers, in a sense, are a little bit more bullish about this than the U.S. carriers are. And from time to time, we hear, because of the overriding trade and tariff situations and issues, that is tourism being used as sort of a weapon or something in the trade war. I don't think so, especially, from the Chinese side, they're putting capacity out there. It isn't like they're shrinking it up. And if you'd look at the mix of travelers here, and it intuitively makes sense, but it works out that you'd have more Chinese travelers pro rata on a Chinese carrier than you would have on the U.S., and you'd have more U.S. travelers on a U.S. carrier than you have on a Chinese carriers, but you have both on each. So it doesn't seem like there's any constraints in the market regarding available seats. So it's just kind of interesting insight. Next slide, please. Okay, this is looking at 2018 and kind of dicing out where Chinese visitors went to in an aggregate look here. And the big markets, of course, you see right there, New York, and that price, that looks at about almost 25% of all visitors. In Los Angeles, 23, San Francisco, 12, and then there's some equal, Las Vegas is high in there, and there's some equal slices among Chicago, Hawaii, Florida, Boston, Seattle, etc. I did a comparison of, this is where they visit, and this also takes the multiple visit aspect into account. For instance, you could come into New York, visit New York, and then go visit Kansas City, so that both of those would be accumulated in our incrementation of visits. So the multiple aspects of it will make it look as though it's over 100%, which it is, because many Chinese visit more than one spot, as do most overseas visitors. So, but I looked at the ports, the relative ports next to the visitation site, and there isn't always a 1-for-1 on that. But New York, it's 25% visited New York, but only 18% came in through either JFK or Newark. So that tells me that many visitors to New York, did come in through JFK or Newark, but also came in from other ports, which means they traveled within the United States. And there's other data that supports that later. Los Angeles was 1-for-1, but 23% and then almost 5% came in through LA. And it doesn't necessarily infer they came in and then didn't visit LA and went on somewhere else, but that could be. That's how all these things work. Where you come in at the port doesn't necessarily mean you visited that locale. So looking down line a little bit more, I don't have it here, but I understand that Hawaii was down. Washington, D.C. may have been down year over year. Los Angeles was actually up. I think Texas was up. So there's, in all this, with the averages, you got ups and downs. So, but an interesting slice at this. So, but it's notable that the three large destination markets don't totally dominate everything. It's over half. But Chinese visitors are very mobile once they're here, and they like to go to various spots. So that's good news. So next slide, please. And so we're looking, this is back also in our survey of international air travelers. We asked survey respondents what the purpose of their trip was. And what I have here is kind of like the visitation. It would add up probably more than 100. It does add up more than 100, but with various purposes, they could come for business and pleasure. There's a mix and match sort of thing in there. If we have another report in there, it shows main purpose of trip, and then and that's on our website, so you could look at all those and they would add up to 100 because you can only have one main purpose. So, but we had all purposes and totalized them up, and you see like business was significant. It was just down a bit from last year, but all these averages or these estimates are subject to margin of error, like you hear with elections and stuff. It's plus or minus 2 or 5 or whatever. And so convention was up a bit, almost 15%. Education was up strong, and this is percent of arrivals. So if the arrivals was down, if you did the math, this might be down a little bit too. But education is a strong suit. Health. This looks like a number that's about average for just about any market. That isn't real big, and you hear a lot about health, but it seems to always hold in the 1% range. Vacation and leisure was down, as was VFR, visit friends and relatives, down. So the decline year over year came more there, but conventions were up. So that's kind of how it looks for last year. So next slide, please. Okay, this is the mode of travel by Chinese residents once they're in the U.S. And I just picked out the major ones here, and I like to roll them up by intercity or intra-city. And so the airline number there, 37% of all Chinese travelers went somewhere by air once they were in the United States. Now, this isn't necessarily the, if they flew in on a direct flight and it landed somewhere and then it continued on. This is where they got off the plane, they got on another plane to go somewhere. So that's a significant percent, because the average of all overseas travelers take a flight somewhere else within the U.S. is about 26%. So Chinese are very mobile within the country. Buses is, that's a big number too, shows probably an East Coast factor. There's a lot of buses running up and down the eastern seaboard, which they utilize, and then some rail in there too. So intra-city, interesting that taxis are being used, and the ride sharing like Lyft and Uber are significant. They've grown quite a bit as a percent. I wonder how the mechanics of that. I guess you have to use an app, and but I guess that's mobile enough where you can, if you're from China with your phone and you come here, it still knows where you're at, and you can order up a ride. So auto is pretty significant also. This would be rented and private. So you can be doing any or all of these. You could take an airline from A to B and take a bus from B to C, and then rent a car and then use an Uber somewhere. So, there isn't exclusivity in this, but Chinese are very mobile. So next slide, please. A little demographic look here. Male, 57%, female, 43, average age is there in the mid-30s. First international trip, this is interesting, and what I have here is 2011 versus 2018. The 2018 number 32.6 first international trip shows that's down because there's more repeat travelers. So that's interesting. You're getting more, probably because of that visa aspect. It's easier to come back year 2, 3, 4, 5 without having to reapply for a visa. So there's more of a shift in that direction. That makes sense. So those numbers, the trip aren't lined up with the mail. I'm sorry, it's more with the year. So one from 2011 to 2018, it increased in repeat travelers, if that hopefully makes sense. Next slide, please. And looking at other attributes of Chinese visitors, party size stayed pretty stable there year over year, 1.7. That's kind of almost in the normal range for all overseas, because there's a lot of single travelers out there. So prepaid trip package, in other words, went up a little bit to 17.5%. I noted that in 2015, prepaid trip or package was 25%. So that's come down a bit, which means maybe as first-time travelers, you were part of a group, the safety in numbers sort of thing, and then as you become a repeat traveler, you kind of move out on your own a little bit more. Japan, for one market, is in the 30s, and it always seems to stay that way. But most Japanese travelers, we're not talking about that market now, but they're heavy into Hawaii and Guam and organized trips there, so they kind of stay stable that way. This one, it's interesting. Chinese travelers are becoming maybe more independent, or not independent, but traveling independently. Advanced trip decision, 62 days holding constant. That means like today they're deciding what they're going to do 62 days from now on average. The planning, if you put a planning attribute in there, add another probably 25 days in there. So what does this mean? If you're looking at attracting the Chinese at a certain time period, you should be leading them out probably 90 days out. However, I have to say that this 62 days, no, that's correct. I was going to say something, but it relates to something else. It's about 62 days out when they actually make a decision. It's the average day length of stay that's a little bit puffed up, if you will, 41 days in 2018. I would look at the median as being more of what the average is for a tourist and business traveler. 41 days does include students. So that's going to be, we can get that number without students in there, but it happens to be in there now. But I'd look at 12 as being more of an average than 41, but it means something. So next slide, please. And this is the wrap up here, just showing our website. And if you go to it, it's travel.trade.gov. It'll take you to this home page, and then there's a section you see on the left side. Sorry, it's small. It says about NTTO, and then it has down below the latest statistics, and then inbound. If you go to inbound, it'll take you to a section where you could see profiles, and it would have China in there. And you could click on that and you can see a big Excel spreadsheet that covers all the attributes. I only put the salient ones up here today, but all the attributes and whether they're main or not as far as purpose of trip and main destination. And then it being Excel, it expands out, I think, from like 1997 all the way through 2018. So you can almost kind of do your own calculations in there if you want. So it's a new presentation, new methodology that we put online this year. So, so that being said, I'm wrapped up here. I'll be glad to take questions now or later. Thank you, Sienna.
Thank you so much, Richard. We'll do Q&A at the end of the session. I can already see there are 1 or 2 questions about the US, and next move on to a Canadian market update from Matt before we move on to the more general advice on how to stand out in an uncertain market.
Thanks, Sienna, and thanks, Richard, and all of our friends at NTTO for those stats. I only wish they could have painted a better picture of the current situation. But now that we've gotten a thorough view of the U.S. side, we'll look at U.S.'s neighbor to the north. The Canadian situation, in many respects, mirrors the situation in the States. Political tensions from December of 2018, safety warnings issued earlier this year, and also with a new wrinkle of visa requirements that went into effect the first of the year that were planned and being implemented before the political tensions arose. In January 2019, China issued a travel warning to Canada and urged citizens to, quote, fully evaluate risks before traveling to Canada. Beijing and Ottawa have been at odds since early December 2018 due to the arrest of a prominent Chinese business figure at the behest of the U.S. As a result of this, many marketing organizations halted promotional efforts and staff visits to China in late 2018. And visa requirements for entry into Canada changed beginning in mid-2018. At that time, tourists from Europe, Africa, and the Middle East included biometrics when applying for a tourist visa. The collection of biometrics facilitates application processing and makes the entrance of travelers with legitimate identities easier and quicker. And biometrics includes the submission of fingerprints and a digital image of the applicant. These requirements were phased in for visitors from Asia at the beginning of 2019, which of course was during the initial stages of the political tensions. And the next slide. I initially thought when we were putting this together that in fact it's a common factor in all travel and tourism statistics that we needed to have a picture of Benjamin Disraeli, the former British Prime Minister, somewhere in this, because as you may know, he's credited with the phrase, "there are lies, damn lies, and statistics." And I always thought that Mr. Disraeli was probably connected to the travel industry in some form or fashion, because as we know, it's rare for different sources to agree on stats. As you'll note here, Destination Canada says that arrivals for the first 6 months of the year were only down 1%, but the overall picture is pretty jumbled. There are good reasons for the variance in the numbers presented above. Statistics Canada includes day trippers, but Destination Canada arrivals here do not. They are only for overnight visitors. Data on air arrivals are similar between Destination Canada and Statistics Canada. Destination BC reported problems with data collection at land ports from September of 2017 to November of 2018. So this could affect the accuracy of their year-over-year comparisons. And also, Ontario measures arrivals only. So this increase does not mean that the Chinese visitors only went to Ontario. They could have flown into Pearson, cleared customs, and then traveled directly to another province, dispersing that 19.6% increase to other parts of the country. Next slide, please. The Destination Canada data presents a very mixed bag. The startling increase in day trips is a bit confounding, and the significant increase in cruise arrivals is certainly a surprise, although those numbers are still low. Nonetheless, it's a very interesting set of numbers that don't show the growth that is expected from the Chinese market, given the more than doubling of Chinese visitors that occurred earlier in the decade.
Thank you very much, Richard, again, and also Matt, for giving those updates on the North American market. We'll now talk about best practice marketing in uncertain times, and while the advice can be especially useful to listeners in North America, most of it is very applicable to any part of the world. One good strategy for anyone doing tourism marketing to China, whether arrivals are up, down, or stable to your destination, is to really understand your most reliable core markets and focus your efforts here, where you'll get the highest return on investment. One part of this is understanding your niche markets. So with more than 120 million Chinese passport holders, it's important that we don't try to make sweeping generalizations about this market, and we don't go for a one-size-fits-all approach. But with such a large amount of outbound travelers and one that is still growing quickly, even a very niche segment can represent a lot of people. There are three niche markets that I'd like to talk about today, as I think they have particular relevance for North America. But there are many other niche interests too, everything from scuba diving to wine tourism to even bird watching and photography. So nature and landscapes are one major attraction for Chinese traveling all over the world, and North America is certainly no exception to this. National parks are a real draw for both the US and Canada. In marketing, you'll want to emphasize the kind of natural landmarks, wildlife, or outdoor experiences that you can't have anywhere else in the world. The New Zealand Tourism Board's WeChat account is very popular. They have, among national tourism boards in general, the highest average views per post, and they focus almost exclusively on beautiful photos of and guides to New Zealand landscapes. Tourism Australia also does a lot to play up their unique wildlife in their Chinese marketing, including photos of Chinese celebrities cuddling koalas and videos of kangaroos and their natural habitats. Cultural tourism is also on the rise among Chinese travelers, and this may be one good angle to take, especially if you're a city with rich cultural resources. Like with nature tourism, you should think about what artwork or museum experience or other cultural experience a visitor would need or want to travel all the way around the world for. Cultural tourism can also include events and festivals, so think about which ones are unique to your destination. As you may already know, TV and film have a very strong influence on Chinese travel destination choice, and so making connections between your destination and shows and movies that are popular and well known in China is another cultural angle you can take. This is especially easy and obvious for places like Los Angeles and New York, but even Travel South USA published a popular WeChat article earlier this year on filming locations in North Carolina. So there's really a lot of potential for many destinations. And of course, a lot of filming happens in Canada, so there's huge potential there as well. Finally, there's sports tourism, which is a rapidly expanding niche market from China. This encompasses a lot of different sports, and the World Cup 2018, for example, gave a huge boost to Chinese tourism to Russia. In the context of North America, and specifically the US, basketball has huge potential. The NBA is actually 6 times more popular in China than the 3 largest European soccer leagues combined. The NBA is the most followed sports account on WeChat, and it has 41 million followers on Weibo. To compare, it has only 28.3 million followers on Twitter. Visit Britain research on sports tourism also found that Chinese tourists were more likely than American ones to follow basketball. This creates a major opportunity for cities across the US to attract NBA fans who want to come see a game in person. The Chicago Bulls, for example, do cooperate with the city's tourism board, and they add Chinese-related content to their games, like a dragon dance at Chinese New Year, for instance, to acknowledge this important audience. Die-hard sports fans are exactly the kind of people who may worry less about cost or other temporary factors. Apart from just reaching them through general marketing activities, you can find dedicated fan clubs in China to engage with. The photo that I have here on the right-hand side is from Gordon Hayward's recent trip to China, where he met with the Chinese Celtics Fan Association. a club with over 72,000 followers on Weibo. We did see a slight decrease in the number of Chinese who were visiting the US to visit friends and relatives from Richard's data between 2017 and 2018. But in several Australian studies, these have showed that VFR tourism is a very stable market that's actually less impacted by political and economic changes than other markets are. And also that VFR travelers are more likely to already have multiple entry visas. According to COTRI, the China Outbound Tourism Research Institute, around 20% of Chinese visitors to North America are VFRs. In the US, California and New York have the largest Chinese populations, and in Canada, it's British Columbia and Ontario. But obviously, the Chinese diaspora is dispersed all around the world and throughout these countries as well. COTRI research that was conducted last summer showed that VFR tourists were less price sensitive, much less price sensitive actually, than non-VFR tourists, which may be because they can stay with friends and family, so they can save on a hotel. They're slightly less sensitive about safety issues than non-VFR tourists are, perhaps because they have friends and relatives already living in the country to assure them and make them feel more secure. But the survey showed that they were more worried about getting a visa. And this is probably because VFR tourists don't have the same flexibility about their travel destination as non-VFRs. If you don't have to go visit friends and relatives, you can obviously just go where it's easiest to get a visa, whereas VFRs specifically must get a visa for the country that their friends and family are living in. So it just adds to the pressure a little bit. In terms of marketing to VFRs, we wouldn't recommend anything too specific, as you don't want to alienate non-VFR visitors with your marketing, and both groups are likely to be using the same digital channels for research. VFRs are influenced by their friends and family, but that doesn't mean that they don't also do their own pre-trip research. That said, marketing that focuses on family travel, especially with multiple generations, is well suited to the VFR market. COTRI data also shows that while VFR visitors to Oceania tend to be older, with North America, it's more of an even distribution, with around 30% of VFR visitors aged 50 and older, and the other 70% evenly divided into the 20 to 29, 30 to 39, and 40 to 49 age brackets. Finally, although VFR tourists are not likely to travel from China as part of a package tour, it's actually not uncommon for them to join a local tour once they reach their destination. So this provides another kind of opportunity for the tourism industry. The last core market that I want to talk about today is students. In the first half of 2019, Chinese leisure travel arrivals to the US were down 5.1%, and business travelers were down by 1%. In contrast, Chinese student arrivals were up by 3%. Students represent a number of excellent opportunities. First, they'll likely want to travel within the country during the time they are studying. They'll already have the visa, they have the time and opportunity to explore more destinations on weekend trips, or for example, if they don't go home over the Thanksgiving, Christmas, or spring break vacation periods. Students attract VFR tourism, especially their parents, and they can also serve as powerful and trusted ambassadors for a city, state, or province, or country, both during and after the course of their study. As you can see, the proportion of international students in the US and Canada that is Chinese and the overall numbers are both significant. Later on, we'll look at a very good case study on how to work with local Chinese students. But for now, I would suggest marketing to a younger demographic if you're trying to catch students' attention, and also check what kinds of social media accounts may already exist for Chinese students in your destination. This might be something like a WeChat group for students, or for example, in the UK, there are a couple of very popular WeChat accounts for Chinese students and young professionals that share UK news, cultural content, and travel recommendations. And for the next part, I'll hand over to Matt.
Thanks, Sienna. And we're gonna look now at some factors that play into the selection of destinations to visit by Chinese visitors, and what their key interests are, or what their key factors are when they're traveling. And as you can see on the slide there, safety concerns are paramount for the Chinese outbound market. Safety and security is not only a concern during travel, but it's also a key factor in determining where travel will take place. And we'll see that on the next slide. And as previously noted, travel warnings were issued by China to Canada in 2019 and to the US last year. And in retaliation, Canada issued a travel warning to China in 2019. The US issued a level 2 exercise increased caution advisory to China in 2019, in January of 2019. And can you go back just 1 second there, Sienna? I just wanted to point out that that slide is specifically looking at what Chinese tourists care most about when they're traveling. You can see that safety outweighs price, the friendliness to tourists, and even the convenience of the flight or obtaining a visa. So it really can't be underestimated what role safety and security plays while they're traveling. And on the next slide, as I mentioned, we'll see the key considerations that are in play when deciding where to travel. And as you can see, that along with local cuisine are the top factors the Chinese take into account when they're deciding where to go. So really that brings up the question, how do you handle safety questions? You've got to provide information and show that you're responding or doing something about safety threats. For example, the Thai Tourism Ministry brought Chinese journalists to see their boats and safety law enforcement equipment. If you are a particularly safe place, stress that in your marketing and messaging. It's important to understand first and foremost how important safety is to Chinese travelers, and that perceptions of safety can be affected by media in China, especially for destinations they haven't visited before. And lastly, it's also important to note that potential travelers don't always have a firm grasp of geography and may not have a good handle on where destinations are in relation to each other and to perceived threats. Just as North American travelers might worry about their trip to Beijing if a storm hits Shanghai, Chinese might have anxiety about incidents in one corner of the US or Canada that are not in close proximity to their intended destination. And when you're considering working with travel agents, keep in mind that group travelers are more sensitive to safety and security concerns. Their decline in numbers to the US last year was much more pronounced. One of the reasons for this may be is that group travelers tend to be older and pay more attention to and are influenced by official government advisories and warnings more than younger travelers. Most Chinese travelers to the US are FITs, but for Canada, the majority still book at least part of their trip through an agent. Even FITs may get advice, visa application help, or do some booking through an agent or online agency that has staff handling individual queries. Furthermore, the customized tour market is growing, and there will be communication between an agent and customer, even if the communication is online only. So it's very important that travel agents have abundant information to completely and confidently answer questions about your destination. And now we're going to look at visa information. And as we noted on, as Richard noted on the previous slide, the visa rejection rate to the US has practically doubled between 2013 and 2018, and he outlined some of the reasons why this may have occurred. But there are steps you can take to help potential Chinese visitors improve their odds of getting a visa, and those are spelled out on the slide as you can see. For example, Dragon Trail Interactive has a B2B tool called CTA Live, about which we have more information on our website. The German National Tourism Board has conducted visa update training through CTA Live online sessions, which is a platform for learning and education for the Chinese travel trade. And the photos you see on the slide there are of the line outside the US Embassy in Beijing, and these were taken back in June. The lines, promisingly enough, are to obtain visas for travel to the US. When it comes to visas, there really is no concept of over-communication. providing clear, concise Chinese language directions via social media and other channels optimizes the chance for success. And lastly, there's something to be said for having a consistent presence in the market. Scaling back can do long-term damage if visitors have forgotten about you when the market comes back. Scaling back can also reinforce negative political messaging or perceptions. Of course, budgetary considerations are legitimate concerns, but if marketing is cut significantly, thought needs to be given to the cost of ramping back up when it is determined that the time is right. If the statistics we've seen are any indication, it's a good bet that you'll ramp up after the market has already picked up, which will make your efforts more difficult and possibly more expensive. Having a consistent, steady presence in the Chinese market is always more effective than stopping and starting promotional activity. And so now that we've gone through those items, we'll quickly present 3 case studies that provide good real-life examples of the kinds of advice we've shared. The first being Los Angeles. Los Angeles has long promoted itself as a tourist destination in China and was the first city in the world to open a tourism office in the country in 2006. At the time, China was not even in the top 10 of international visitors to Los Angeles. The opening of the tourism office predated by 2 years of the bilateral agreement to promote group leisure travel between China and the United States. As the slide indicates, Los Angeles has built-in advantages that make it an attractive destination for Chinese visitors. It's a major air hub for the West Coast, it has a large Chinese community, and it has popular universities for Chinese students. And of course, arts and entertainment play a big role. As a sports fan myself, I'll note that the Chinese are massive NBA fans, as Sienna pointed out, and having 2 teams in the market with star power certainly is a draw for Chinese NBA fans. Yes, LA does have a lot going for it, but they've made very serious, sustained efforts to attract Chinese tourists. There are currently 4 LA tourism offices in China. The Chinese promotional website is mobile optimized, Chinese hosted, and has the Welcome China sign from the Tourism LA marketing video right at the top of the home screen, with the film subtitled in Chinese. Even though they have lots of advantages, they make the most of their situation by sustaining a multifaceted approach to tourism promotion that is allowing them to grow their market share even in this downturn. They also have one of the leading destinations in terms of mobile payment acceptance in the US. This is not only a matter of convenience for Chinese visitors, but it also has a safety component. Using mobile payments means that currency is not being handled, converted, etc., which adds to the perception of personal safety.
Thank you very much, Matt. Our next case study looks at how one destination, Peru, managed a safety crisis involving violent crime by acknowledging the incident and providing official information and follow-up actions. In February of this year, a tourism lodge in Peru was attacked by a gang of armed human traffickers, while a tourist group from Hong Kong was eating dinner there. One Peruvian tour guide was killed, and some items, including a passport of one of the Hong Kong tourists, were stolen. So this was a very serious and frightening incident for everybody involved. As the tour group was from Hong Kong, it did get significant media attention within China. The Peruvian Tourism Board responded to the situation very quickly. Working with their PR agency in China, they spoke to their travel trade partners to keep them well informed in case clients had concerns. They also published an official statement on Weibo about what had occurred and a follow-up post several days later about what was being done about the situation and assuring readers that Peru had not become unsafe for Chinese travelers. They explained that the local police were taking action to ensure the safety of tourists and that the stolen passport would be replaced within 2 days. They also provided a free information hotline and email address that Chinese visitors could contact. Although the incident itself was terrible, these actions let current and potential Chinese visitors know that it was being addressed and that there were resources to help them with any issues they may encounter. From Peru, the National Tourism Board also organized follow-up training for their local partners that had a strong emphasis on health and safety. One issue is that in many places in the world, Chinese tourists have now become a target for thieves because they're seen as wealthy and likely to carry a lot of cash. So one part of the training with Peruvian tour operators was to make them aware of this and advise them to advise their Chinese clients not to wear flashy jewelry or expensive watches or anything else that would draw attention to them and possibly make them a target. This is yet another reason, as Matt mentioned, that it's a positive development for more businesses to accept China Union Pay cards and Chinese mobile payments. So the tourists don't have to carry cash, which will make them feel safer, as well as removing the incentive for crime. Our last case study, Edinburgh in Scotland, is a destination that has not been facing tourism market uncertainty or any crises, but it does show excellent outreach to local Chinese students and how to leverage student communities for tourism marketing and reputation building. Chinese students are a very good source of photos, they're really engaged, and they offer recommendations and opinions that are very trustworthy for other Chinese. In addition to helping to attract visitors from China to Edinburgh, they also help to attract Chinese students who are studying in other cities in the UK. So similarly to the US and Canada, Chinese students are the leading source of international students in the UK, and they make up around 1/3 of the foreign student population at UK universities. Around 10,000 of these students are based in Scotland. The Edinburgh Tourism Action Group, which is the tourism body responsible for marketing to a Chinese audience, they run freshman orientation events in Mandarin for Chinese students who are new to the city, so they make contact with them immediately. And they have a WeChat group for Chinese students in Edinburgh. They also reach out to Chinese students and former students through their Chinese social media by asking for and sharing user-generated content. A great example of how well this can work is the post that you can see on the screen here. A report named Edinburgh Scotland's kindest city. So Edinburgh shared this on WeChat, and they asked readers to send in their stories of random acts of kindness they had experienced in Edinburgh. They then published those stories. So the contributors got to see their stories on the official Edinburgh channel, which is exciting. And you now have all of these testimonials of local people in Edinburgh being especially kind to Chinese people who are living in Edinburgh. So this obviously makes the city look very welcoming and nice to potential visitors and also other potential students. In the last year, Edinburgh's most viewed WeChat post was about cherry blossoms in the city, and all of the photos for that were sourced from account followers, many of whom are students, or were students. So all in all, this is an excellent example of what destinations throughout North America with sizable Chinese student populations could also be doing. So that wraps up our core content today, but before we move on to the Q&A section, we'd like to share some additional learning opportunities and resources. The first one is a workshop series that I'll let Matt explain a little bit about.
Thanks, Sienna. If you're interested in working with Dragon Trail Interactive and conducting one-day educational and consultative sessions in 2020, please contact me. My email is on the slide there. We conducted a very successful China, the Future of Travel workshop in Beijing after the conclusion of ITB China earlier this year. And we'd welcome the opportunity to conduct one-day events for members or stakeholders in your area. During this time of uncertainty in the market, having up-to-date trend and visitation information is key for decision makers and marketers being asked to do more with less resources. This can be a standalone event or part of a regular stakeholder member meeting. And you can contact me for details and a schedule, and we can work with you to get those on the calendar for next year.
Thanks. So next, if you haven't already got a free digital copy of the 2019 edition of China, the Future of Travel, our book, you can still do so by visiting chinafutureoftravel.com. This is a full-length book with information on the Chinese tourism industry and how it works, tourism law, tourism marketing, consumer market trends and segments, business and negotiation etiquette, and much more information that will be useful to anyone in the tourism and hospitality industries that is working with Chinese guests and partners. All of the information in the book is updated as of May 2019, and the book also includes case study interviews with Chinese travelers and tourism professionals. So again, it is free to download an electronic copy, and you can go to either the Dragon Trail website or the link below. And again, we will be sharing a PDF of all the presentation slides with everybody in the coming days, so you'll have the link there too. Finally, our next webinar is coming up in just 3 weeks, and we will be focusing on Chinese tourist shopping behavior and preferences. As you probably know, Chinese tourists are the world's biggest spenders, and shopping is a major part of the Chinese overseas travel experience. That said, Chinese tourism shopping is changing a lot, thanks to the rise in independent travel, younger travelers, and new preferences and tastes. This webinar will outline the most significant trends and what retailers and brands need to do to stay relevant. We'll be holding the webinar at 2 times a day to suit different time zones and schedules, and registration is already open on the events page on our website and at the link below. So at this point, we'll open it up to Q&A. Please do ask your questions using the Q&A button, which you should see on your Zoom control panel. And if you have any additional questions, either for myself or Matt at Dragon Trail or for Richard at the NTTO that you would like to ask later or that you think of later, you can always email me. My email is on the screen here, and you'll have it in the presentation, and Matt's was just a few slides ago.